told Scott before the service started that my dark slides don't show up if those lights are on, and you don't really need to see me anyway. So from now on, I'm going to have the slides be a lot lighter. I have noticed a trend that anytime I'm preaching, Martin is not here. Just going to point that out. I personally think he just wants to fall asleep in private while I'm preaching, and so he doesn't have to fall asleep in public in front of me here while I'm preaching. No, he knows I love him. So tonight's lesson is the continuation, and at least for now, the final part 3 of the lesson series on spiritual warfare, and specifically knowing your enemy. And so I'll give a brief overview because we're probably about 6 months into it at this point, just judging by how it's kind of hard. It's a good problem to have. It's kind of hard to get on the preaching schedule here. And like I said, we have plenty of folks who are willing to preach and willing. And so this started a year and a half ago, really, with the Soldiers of Christ, a Warrior Perspective that I gave. That was the first one that really taught us that there's a war going on around us all the time, spiritual warfare, and we need to be on the lookout for it. And so the next following 2, now 3 lessons are about Satan's tactics. Jeff and I had this conversation earlier. We were trying to figure out the verse, but Paul talks in 2 Corinthians 2, verse 11, about not being ignorant of his devices, and some of your versions say his schemes. So that's really what this whole lesson's about. That probably could have been, an introductory verse that I used in each one of these so that we know Satan's devices and we understand his tactics and how he comes at us. One of the themes throughout this lesson series is that Satan exists and that he's very active in our world. And Peter puts it this way, that be of sober spirit, be on the alert, because your adversary, the devil, he prowls around like a roaring lion, waiting for someone to devour. And so we need to not be weak targets, right? We don't need to not be that lame gazelle out there that just is easy prey. We need to be a very hard target. Not only does he exist and he's prowling around looking for a victim, but don't ignore him, right? The greatest trick, this is another theme that we've noticed, the greatest trick that the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that he didn't exist. And I think tied closely with that is some people just walk around like, I don't want to know about it. And that is to their own destruction. And so the point of this lesson series is to ask yourself, are you walking around acting like he doesn't exist? Or are you actively looking for him in the world around you and specifically in your life so that you can counter his tactics? So in the last 2 lessons, we talked about how Satan uses deception, comfort, and distraction as his strategy, as his tactics. He uses those things against us. We learned first and foremost that Satan is a deceiver. That's kind of the umbrella under which all of his tactics can fall under. And specifically, we talked about how he can deceive you into continuing to believe something that you already believe, especially when you believe it in error. So if I'm Satan, I will tell atheists that it's foolish to believe that there is a God. I'll tell non-believers that there's no way you can be forgiven. You've done too many bad things in your life. And I'll tell Christians that their closely held false doctrines are true. That what they've always been taught is true, and that if anyone were to question it, then it's questioning the preachers and the elders or the parents or just those wise people in their life, what they taught them. And how dare they question what those people that you love taught you. Then we discussed about how Satan can use comfort to keep you from doing the things that really matter. If Satan can make you avoid being uncomfortable, then he can keep you right where you are and never growing. So if I'm Satan, I'll use comfort to keep you going back to the things that you enjoy rather than delaying gratification. We used Moses as an example of that. I'll use comfort to keep you warming a pew and just making yourself feel just good enough about yourself. Maybe I'm good enough because I go to church to make you feel comfortable. I'll make sure you're comfortable enough in your finances to not rely on God. And I'll keep you from evangelizing because you fear rejection, because that's uncomfortable. And I'm going to do everything I can to get you complacent. Try to hit autopilot and to stop working and then just kind of fall into that comfort zone. In the last lesson, we discussed how Satan can use distraction. This was a big one, right? You remember the moonwalking bear that walked across the screen in the video. And you had no idea he was there because you weren't looking for him. And so, by definition, distraction is so insidious because you don't know that you're distracted. And that's why we need to be on the alert, right? Don't let yourself be distracted. And so if I'm Satan, I'm going to get you addicted to your phone or social media, which gives you a significantly higher chance of depression and anxiety. I'm going to turn you into a workaholic because you want to make more money or buy more things. I'll make you consumed by video games or TV shows or movies or sports or whatever in order to get your focus on worldly things rather than the things that really matter, seeking first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness. We ended that lesson with one more distraction, which was foolish and stupid arguments, as Paul said. These are the two verses that we showed on the screen, and we discussed them a little bit in the lens of distraction. The first one is 2 Timothy, and he says that don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments because you know they produce quarrels. So if I'm Satan, I'm going to distract you with foolish and stupid arguments. That was the point of the lesson. That's the point of putting that, studying that verse in the lesson. In the second verse you see there in Titus 3, he says, but avoid foolish controversies, genealogies, dissensions, and quarrels about the law, which are unprofitable and worthless. And so there's a lesson for us there. We can't be so worried about law keeping that we lose sight of the weightier matters, like justice and mercy and faithfulness. That comes from Matthew chapter 23. If that's what we've done, then we've let Satan distract us. And so this is where we're going to pick up today. Today we're going to zoom in on that thought to see a tactic that Satan uses to attack us, which is through strife and dissension in the church. I told Sam for the songs tonight, really what we're talking about is strife and dissension in the church. And so the beginning of the greatest commands hymn is love one another. And it goes through 1 John and all the other things that it talks about love. That's the solution. That's one of the solutions. We'll go into other solutions, but loving one another is the solution and preventative maintenance for strife and dissension. And so let's talk a little bit about strife and dissension in the church tonight. To understand how effective this technique is, we go back to the military perspective. The very first lesson in this series was all about looking through the lens of the military to see the warfare, the spiritual warfare going on. We started with soldiers of Christ. And so what does this mean in terms of military tactics, right? And so in the military, you have a very effective tactic called divide and conquer. It's probably pretty easy to conceptualize whether you have military training or not. The idea is that if I can divide your forces, you are no longer able to put up as effective of a defense. Or, even better, if I can get your two forces to fight against each other, fight with each other, I don't have to fight you at all sometimes. All I have to do is roll over what's left after y'all are done fighting. Fighting each other makes you weaker, and then you're a lot easier to defeat. And so we're back to quoting the famous general, Sun Tzu, who said it like this: if the enemy is united, separate them. If sovereign and subject, if your enemy, right, if they're in accord, if they agree, put division between them. And so in other words, if your enemy is united, then divide him. This prevents the enemy from functioning as a single, stronger unit. There's some very famous generals in history that were particularly good at divide and conquer. You may have heard of some of them. Napoleon Bonaparte, Alexander the Great, and Julius Caesar tops the list. They were successful in part because they were effective at employing this tactic. In fact, we have a great example of what not to do, or how not to do it, on our own soil. In the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876, General George Custer willingly split his cavalry. Cavalry is the crosses on the hill. Cavalry is the horses. So cavalry, he split up his cavalry into 3 separate groups to surround the Native American encampment. And this allowed the Lakota and the Cheyenne forces to overwhelm each group individually. Dividing your forces is a very poor tactic. And so this is a biblical concept as well. Up to now, I've only talked about the military application of it, but you can see how it's biblical. And if Satan can do that to us, then he wins. But it's a biblical tactic that's taught in the Bible as well. In Mark chapter 3, Jesus teaches us that a house divided against itself, if a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand. He said similar statements in Matthew chapter 12 and Luke 11. And also we have the preacher who tells us in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. 2 together is the implication. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken if you stand together. So as you read your Bible and you have your spiritual warfare lens on, you can read passages like this and see how Satan can use them to his benefit. If I'm Satan, I'm going to try to divide the house, and I'll do everything I can to keep Christians from supporting one another like a cord of 3 strands. Now, C.S. Lewis talks about this in his book as well. You've heard me talk about the methodology that I am using in these lesson series of showing you through the lens of Satan and how he wants to be successful. That comes from C.S. Lewis's book, the Screw Tape Letters. He actually devotes a whole chapter letter to this, right? It's an uncle demon writing letters to a nephew demon. And in letter number 2, the uncle demon chastises his nephew for allowing... Sorry, you're not ready for that yet. The uncle demon chastises his nephew for allowing his human to become a Christian, but then advises him to make the human disillusioned with the church by focusing on the flaws and ordinary habits of fellow believers. So basically he's saying, hey, okay, you lost the battle, now you've got your human in church. But okay, I can work with that. Because what you're going to do now is you're going to make him really frustrated at his fellow believers for whatever reasons. In this case, he says, focusing on the flaws and ordinary habits of others in the pews around you. And so Satan knows that if he can get you to harbor any kind of bad feelings for a fellow believer, no matter how big or how small, it can fester into something much bigger and turn into strife and dissension in the church. You see, if I'm Satan, I'm fine with you going to church as long as you don't edify one another. I'm fine of you going to church as long as you don't pay attention to the sermon. And I can actually use you going to church if I can cause you to cause strife and dissension within the church. You see, the church, God designed the church as a support structure for each other. We're supposed to come out of the world and all the friends and the associations and the activities that we did in the world, and we come here. You're sitting in a support group. You come here with other like-minded people who want to come out of that lifestyle and want to be a follower of Jesus and a follower of God, and you support each other. That congregation, the local congregation, is that new community. It's a key component to that community because that's where a Christian should be able to come to be encouraged and supported and to support others. So it's a support group. We are to share each other's burdens and help each other carry those burdens. So in Galatians 6:2, that's what Paul tells the church in Galatia. He says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. In Romans 12:15, it says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. You support each other. If there's strife and dissension among you, it's really hard to rejoice with someone else. I can cause strife and dissension if you're rejoicing, if I can cause strife and dissension. While you're rejoicing because you've had some accomplishment, I'm standing over here going, wow, really jealous of that. I can't be happy for you. I can't rejoice with you. And if I don't care anything about you, or I'm angry at you, or I have some kind of strife or dissension, and you're weeping, I'll be like, well, tough for that guy. That shouldn't be named amongst our group. We're also told to confess our sins one to another. And you're like, how is that countering the strife and dissension? Well, it's like a sinner's AA. We're here to support one another and to be each other's accountability partners. And so if Satan can prevent all of that through strife and dissension, then he wins. And so this is why Jesus taught that if you've brought your sacrifice, so if you're sitting in the church and there's some kind of problem you have with someone else, with a brother, you need to stop what you're doing and go address that first. It comes from Matthew chapter 5. And so, do you have something against your brother? If so, Satan has effectively caused strife and dissension. So let's get specific. And let's ask the question, where can Satan use this tactic in the church? What does that look like in the church today? I kind of categorize these. It's not a perfect science. I'm still not happy with it. I probably never will be. I'm going to start with small things, because that's what C.S. Lewis talks about, and I think that's probably the most insidious, the one that sneaks up on you. This is the disputes over foolishness. Little things that fester and grow over time. These are things that are not of a scriptural nature. These aren't the things that we study the Bible over. Now, we can do that. We have a very good way of sometimes shoehorning a passage into the topic to try and, make it a scriptural issue. That's not what I'm talking about. Bickering and arguing over things that are unprofitable and unnecessary. Some examples would be arguing over how someone dresses for church, or maybe they get up a lot during service, or maybe they're late to services. You can probably think of a few examples of your own. Something that just really bothers you, and you start to think less of the person, not of the activity. So if I'm Satan, I'm going to take that little small thing that bothers you, and I'm going to make it fester and turn it, it's gangrene. It just grows and grows. I'm going to tell you to hold on to it until it grows into a true distaste for that person. And I'll use it to create a divide between you and others, so at a minimum, you won't talk to each other. Or better yet, you argue with each other. That's the first one. The second one is disagreements on biblical, you can find the topic in the Bible, but non-doctrinal subjects. And as I talk about, you'll kind of see the distinction there. These are matters of opinion that we have, but we can argue them pretty well with scriptures. The two examples that immediately came to my mind were what music we let our children listen to, or whether or not we homeschool our children. Both, by the way, have the same exact argument. And we go to the scriptures for it. We could also lump our traditions into this category, such as whether or not to have a Sunday evening worship, or how often we have Bible studies. You're not going to find those things in the Bible, but sometimes people treat them as if God commanded them. That's kind of an older topic, because COVID really had a way of scrambling that up. That shook it up a little bit, where people took a really hard look. And we were in Japan, and it was led by the men of the congregation. We didn't have elders. And we really had a hard time with that, like not meeting every time we normally did before COVID. And there are plenty of congregations stateside that just stopped coming. And certainly there were plenty who got rid of their Sunday evening service. And so if I'm Satan, I'm going to make mountains out of molehills. I'll turn it into an us versus them issue, that if you don't agree with me, then you're wrong. I'll incite your pride and your desire to be right, or to look more righteous, into a disagreement between brethren. I'll try to get you to treat a non-essential topic like something that thus saith the Lord. And if you don't agree with me, then you're not a brother. Or at least I'm going to look down on you because of it. If I can get you to do that, then I win. Okay, that's the next the category. And then you saw this one coming, right? Disagreements on doctrine. Now, let me start out by saying that there are absolutely topics where we must take a stand. There are absolutely topics, doctrinal subjects that are a hill we must die on. But we can't treat every topic that way, especially with someone who is new to the faith and just learning. Go back to Paul's example where there was strife over endless genealogies and foolish disputes. I notice the ones I underlined, right? Both of those things were really important. Both of those things were doctrinal subjects. The genealogy, first of all, that showed how Jesus was the Messiah that was prophesied to come, promised to come. But you couldn't be you couldn't serve as a priest unless you proved your lineage, your genealogy. And what about the law? Doctrinal topics, that's exactly where doctrinal topics come from, the law. Now, how could Paul be calling those things foolish, unprofitable, and worthless? He's not. He's talking that the foolish and unprofitable and worthless parts are when those things turn into dissensions and quarrels. So we need to be very careful how we let things slide into strife and dissension. Another example we have is in Romans 14 and 1 Corinthians 8. Paul talks about a very similar topic, right? He discusses eating meat sacrificed to idols. And he prioritizes love and patience and conscience over strict dietary restrictions and knowledge. And so basically you have two individuals. You have someone who is out of a pagan lifestyle, come out of that lifestyle into the Christian life, and all their life, all they've known is this meat was sacrificed to an idol, so it was special. But now as a Christian, they can't eat that meat. That violates their conscience. But you have a mature Christian brother over here who knows, I got the liberty to eat that meat. There's nothing wrong with that meat. It's just meat. Neither one should look on the other with anger or frustration or dissension. We be patient with one another. And Paul basically looks at that one that understands, their mature Christian that understands their liberty and says, you be patient with them. You don't be a stumbling block for them. Don't even eat meat. Certainly don't eat it around them. Don't do anything that causes them to stumble. And I think there's a mandate for the one whose conscience is pricked, and maybe they know, I know this meat isn't special, but I still can't, I'm not comfortable with eating this meat. My conscience won't let me. Not to make others restrain from that meat as well. And so that's how Christians avoid dissension and strife. What about other topics that Christians debate over that aren't clearly addressed in scriptures but are still considered a spiritual matter? Things like whether or not Christians should celebrate Halloween or Christmas, whether or not a Christian should smoke or drink alcohol or gamble. All these are topics that have biblical arguments, absolutely, for or against them, but they don't have a very specific, thus saith the Lord, command. These are the topics where we should be willing to discuss and not let our discussions devolve into strife and dissension. Christians should be willing to carefully and lovingly discuss these things, to consider each other's perspectives while not letting it turn into something that divides them. We've gone to many churches, been members of many churches in all of our travels. It has been my experience that in every church, no matter how big or how small, they have members that disagree on some topic. Head coverings is one of them. One cup or multiple cups is kind of an old argument now. I don't really hear it very much anymore, but that's one thing that people they go to the mattresses on that. That means go to war on that. Sorry, I probably shouldn't have used that phrase. But they would go to war over that. But at some point, and again, the one cup or multiple cup, the head coverings, that stopped being a fight and said, look, here's this perspective, and there's this perspective. And most of the churches that I know basically said, you as individuals have to decide on your own. We're not going to war over this. We're not going to let it cause strife and dissension. back to the multiple churches, right? I've accepted the fact that there are going to be disagreements on biblical topics. If we all agree on every topic in the Bible, then we either aren't being honest with each other or we haven't truly thought through every topic. The moment a congregation has two people in it, there will likely be a difference of conviction or conclusion on a topic. Now, I sent this lesson to Martin, so he gets a little bit of a shout out tonight. And he actually quoted his dad. He says, my dad said that if the moment I find a perfect congregation, I'm going to go there and I'm going to mess that up. But the idea is the moment I find a congregation that agrees on everything, I'm going to go there because there's something that we probably don't agree on. It's my opinion that it is a sign of a healthy church that we can discuss topics thoughtfully and include peaceful debate where we disagree. And we have done that in this congregation, and I think we do it really well. So I think we do a good job at this. And that's what prevents strife and dissension and fosters peace. Now, I must point out, that's the first time I've used that word. Peace is not the lack of disagreement. Peace does not mean we all agree on everything. It's treating each other with love and respect while you disagree. I'm going to use a quote from a movie where he said, I think you've misunderstood peace with quiet. Peace and quiet are not the same thing. Likewise, unity and uniformity are not the same thing. Unity is agreeing on the core principles of Christianity, those things that I mentioned before, doctrinal topics that there must be a hill that we die on, Christ being the Son of God, that he died for our sins, the gospel plan of salvation, everyone truly desiring to go to heaven. That is a long list, but there's a few. And then being patient with one another in our understanding of the Bible and our individual spiritual journeys. I can't say we all. I've seen multiple congregations that really look like they all agree on on everything. And usually there's one individual in that congregation that drives that culture. And that person also drives a culture of you don't ask questions. You don't inquire, because it's like you're questioning me. And they teach it like whatever I think is the right answer. And everybody kind of goes along with it. Everyone should work out their own salvation with fear and trembling, and that includes to work out your own convictions on certain topics. We were talking about this when Martin and I had a discussion. It was more than Martin and I. I think Sam was there too. I think Darren was. We were at Sam's house and we were having a discussion about something. And I think we had like 3 different opinions on a perspective. And we were referencing that at the back of the church building one night. And I think it was that topic that he was talking about when he said, well, then Jeremiah just has to, if he was only here right now, he has to consider me the weaker brother. And I was floored. I'm like, no, you're an elder. I don't consider you a weaker brother. However, you've been studying this way longer than I have, and I might get to the place where you are on that particular topic. But I cannot in good conscience just agree with you because you are who you are. I have to go with my own conviction, and I have to continue to study and be assured of what I believe. And I think that is a healthy mentality to have in the congregation. So if I'm Satan and I can get you to bicker and fight over every doctrinal subject, then I win. And what we shouldn't do is consider someone else apostate or not a brother when we disagree on a topic. That's why it's so crucial that we have strong relationships with each other. Because strong relationships prevent these kinds of things. We can talk it out civilly and understand each other's perspective. You can know that the other person has the right motives, a heart for truth, loving God and wanting to follow and please Him within the limits and the confines of their own understanding at that time of the particular topic. And then with that in common, you can move forward with calm debate and discussion and hopefully a consensus. But sometimes it's just not going to happen. When that happens, when it doesn't happen, can you live at peace with each other? So if I'm Satan, I'm going to incite your pride and make you want to win the argument and be right over winning the soul and or maintaining the relationship. The last one that I'll give you is disagreements or dissension with other denominations. This falls under the division within the church, right? You've heard the sermons on unity, right? That talks about denominations or split of unity and everything, and I'm not taking away from any of those sermons. We need to be very careful with considering everyone from a particular congregation as unsaved, not a brother. A few months after we were here, Sam did a Bible study lesson on a Sunday morning, and he entitled it, I think it was Are People from Other Denominations Lost? And it was a great discussion. And here's kind of the bottom line. It's on YouTube. You can go look it up. But basically, it's like we need to be very careful at assuming that everyone within a congregation that says Church of Christ on the sign, every one of them are saved. And that everyone of a different congregation outside that doesn't have Church of Christ on the sign is automatically lost. God is the one who adds people to the church. God is the one who decides who's saved or lost, and he will show mercy on whom he will show mercy, and I'm not going to whittle on God's end of the stick. We need to consider fellow believers in Christ with a biblical worldview as allies in the fight against evil. That doesn't mean you agree with them on every topic. Remember, we don't agree with each other on every topic many times. Don't turn it into another us versus them mentality. We may not be able to worship together because of disagreements on musical instruments or taking the Lord's Supper, but those differences shouldn't result in a feeling of rivalry or animosity. Let me give you a worldly example. This tells you how long ago I put this lesson together. I was putting this lesson together, and it was during the Olympics, during the Winter Olympics. And if you know Melissa, if the Olympics are on, summer or winter, it's on the TV. We're watching it. And I think we had come home from church that night, and the USA versus Canada hockey game for gold was playing on the TV. And we got to catch it. Man, it was such a good game. And it ended right because USA won, right? And so the star player on the USA team, their last name was Hughes, no relation. He had 2 teeth knocked out in that competition. And he went back in and he played and he won. He made the scoring goal. It's goals in hockey, right? He made the scoring goal. Game over. And they were interviewing him, and it was very distracting because he's got a big old hole in his face. He's missing 2 of his teeth. He's got blood all over the place. But I loved what he said. He said, this team, we love each other so much. This is a win for our country because we love our country so much. Why is that so significant? Because the players on that team, sorry, Frankie, I'll move back to the microphone. The players on that team are all NHL players from across the country, and they're rivals oftentimes. I don't know about hockey rivalries. I'm assuming it's the same as football rivalries. They're enemies in some cases, but when they're all on that USA hockey team, they're a team. And they're united for a cause, to win the gold and to beat Canada at whatever cost. First time it had been done since 1980. Do we think of our brethren the same? Do we think of people who believe in Jesus Christ as the only way to salvation the same? We can unite with people from other denominations against a common cause, such as abortion or LGBTQ or whatever. Here's another quote. And I got Martin to send it to me in text because he said it, and I was like, what did you say? Because I'm quoting you. We can work together where we can while protecting ourselves from undue influence in areas outside specific shared convictions. That's a dense statement. That's why I had him send it to me. Okay, so what he's saying is, I may not agree with you on very important things to me, but that doesn't mean that we're enemies. That means I can protect myself from like going towards what I think is wrong, biblically speaking, but we can fight alongside each other against evil in the world, the abortion and the other thing, right? If we can't do that, then Satan has divided us. So if I'm Satan, I'm going to create an us versus them attitude between denominations. I'm going to make you look at people in other denominations like there's no way they can be saved, and they're just as bad as people who are living in sin, and they are no help to me in the fight against evil. I'll prevent you from uniting under a common cause that will counter my evil activities elsewhere. Do you see how that's an advantage? I will divide and conquer via denominations. That's how I will use divide and conquer against the church today. So the conclusion is simple. Don't let Satan win. Don't let him divide us either within congregations or other denominations. Don't view another God-fearing person who believes in salvation through Jesus Christ as your enemy. I hope this lesson series has been helpful for you and given you a lens through which you read the Bible so that you can see Satan at work. I'm sure there's more that we could add to the lesson series because Satan has many tactics. But for now, we know that he works through deception. He likes to deceive us into continuing to believe our erroneous beliefs. He uses comfort and complacency to keep us from doing the right things. He uses distraction to pull your attention away from the things that really matter. And he uses strife and dissension within the church to divide and conquer us. But the wonderful thing is, if we're on God's side, no weapon that's formed against us will prosper. You can resist the devil, and he will flee from you. You have chosen the winning side, and it's only a matter of time before Satan is ultimately defeated. But if you haven't even chosen a side yet, you're actually on the losing side. If you haven't chosen to follow Jesus and submit to him, you stand defenseless against everything Satan throws at you. If you need to fix that this evening, you can make it right now if you come while we stand.